Hey guys, welcome back to Brain Trash. This is the podcast where we take the chaos out of your nervous system and out of your brain and explain it in a way that makes you say, oh, maybe I'm not broken. I'm just wired a little differently. Or maybe this is normal. So I'm your host, well, co-host, Maria, and this is.
And I'm Tabitha.
And we are psychiatric nurse practitioners, and we're also super nerds on understanding mental health, and we're stoked to help you further understand it too. Today's episode is talking about hormones. So we have a series of episodes actually that you can look at the next couple weeks, and we're going to be talking about kind of like what happens during our cycle. Is it normal? What can you expect? Is there a misdiagnosis that's occurring? What happens with neurodivergent brains? What happens if you've had like a hysterectomy? How do hormones affect your stimulant, or how do they affect your mood medications? All of that stuff. So tune in for today. We're excited to have you guys. All right, Tabitha, this is kind of like a jam that we've been talking about for a while. Hormones are kind of like a weird place where the intersection is like not fully explored by women's health and it's not fully explored by psych. It's kind of like the missing link, right? Like, what are you seeing in practice?
I think for the most part, for somebody to get a provider to actually understand and look at their hormones, it's very inaccessible. It's mostly offered by like naturopaths or very high-priced, individualized primary care providers who specialize in this type of stuff, or women's health providers who specialize. And that's really great that they offer that and understand that. And I also think that this is something that every single human that has a uterus and or ovaries or is on any type of hormone replacement needs to know about their own body in order to better understand why they're experiencing what they're experiencing. And really, I think it's one of the hardest things to like bring up and point out in appointments too, because there's so much negative connotation when it comes to hormones. Like if you ask somebody when they tell you like, oh, I feel really suicidal, and you're like, well, where are you at in your cycle? They're like, oh, well, you're just dismissing me because it's my hormones, because there's so much negative connotation about this. But in reality, if you look at a normal cycle, like any person experiencing this level of rise and fall and surge and depletion of all of these hormones is going to experience some type of symptoms. And so understanding this about your own body is really, really important, however you want to hack it. But really, most people are just taught, you know, in sex ed or whatever they teach now. I don't even know if they do sex ed anymore. Like, your uterus will make a baby and your ovary has the eggs. And right, there's like, it's very much focused on reproduction and not necessarily what's happening throughout your body, your brain, all of it. So it's something that I spend a lot of time educating my patients on, because I think it puts so much into context for them. And I can really see it click for people when I do actually talk them through this and we really track it over multiple cycles and they start to understand it better. I'll hear them start using the word like, well, yeah, this happened, but I was in my luteal phase and then it got better. And it's like, okay, fuck yes. You're like understanding, and you're not like having this extreme amount of distress and feeling like you're crazy, when it's really, hey, here's physiologically what's happening in my body. I understand why. And so it's not as distressing.
So this is kind of like a space for empowerment for anyone who has a cycle, right? But also like for clinicians to better understand, like, and start putting into context, how are mental health symptoms related to normal and abnormal hormone shifts? Because a lot of us are not asking those questions. A lot of us are saying, like, is there a cyclical mood change that's happening? Is that bipolar disorder? And we're not considering the fact of like, well, where was that at in this person's cycle? Or like, you know, looking at like, okay, there's like high impulsivity, or like the stimulant's not working. Let's change the medication, but not asking like, hey, in the last week, if you pooped out on your medication, like, where are you at in your cycle? So there's just kind of a lot of things that we're missing by not knowing these things, right? It's a gap in NP school. It's a gap.
Well, and yeah, I mean, even for example, on that topic is like, if somebody is in the height of their luteal phase and all of a sudden their stimulant's not working well, and you boost up the dose and then their period starts and it's like estrogen's on the rise, it starts to really work well and maybe a little too well, and they're feeling like, you know, just gacked out or whatever, and you're like, oh no, they're manic, and now no more stimulant for you. And that's not the solution, you know?
Right. or get too anxious and they're like, well, that dose didn't work and this dose is too anxiety provoking, so let's just take it out. So there's just a kind of a lot of things that are important in understanding this. So I'm going to let you kind of like run through your little 101 spiel that you give to your clients and kind of like walk us through that. And then we could talk a little bit about like how it applies to mental health and some of the symptoms related to each of those phases too.
Okay, cool. So in general, when we talk about a cycle, this is not just people who have periods. It's not just people who have a normal, regular timing of periods. It's really anybody that has, like I said, either a uterus and or ovaries. Even if you have birth control, even if you are, in perimenopause or menopause or whatever, you have the pieces in your body that are making this happen. Also, if you're on HRT, this can impact it as well. So even if you don't have those things, maybe you're in chemical menopause from a total hysterectomy, maybe you're a trans person that is utilizing HRT. These are things that all can be encompassed in this as well. But when I talk about this, what I'm going to talk about is just like your regular natural cycle, assuming you've got a uterus and ovaries. That do not have any other pathological issues such as, PCOS or endometriosis or things like that. Essentially, there's 4 main phases in the cycle that I like to really highlight for people. Cycle starts on day 1 when your period starts. So your uterus is shedding its lining. I don't know, are we going to have the graphic up now or
I mean, we'll post the graphic. So we're gonna have some graphics, some charts. So if you need a visual to understand this, a lot of us have auditory processing issues. So you might be like, oh my God, I got it, but now I just don't remember anything, or I need a visual to process this. So we'll have all of those on paperflowerinstitute.com that you guys can go to and access. And I think there should be a video one too.
Usually I'm looking insane on my appointments, holding up a whiteboard, like, see this right here, this is this, and this is this. So that's why I'm like, my instinct is to be like, look at this picture. But initially, right, hormones are all super low right when your period starts. So I'm mainly going to talk about estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so day 1 of your cycle, you start to bleed. Estrogen, progesterone, both super low. As you start to bleed, estrogen rises, and then you get to follicular phase after you bleed, between bleeding and ovulation. This is where your body is stimulating your ovaries to produce follicles. And these are basically just little bulbs that have eggs in them, right? Eventually, near the end of that follicular phase, it's going to choose one and be like, this is the one. And it's going to send it out into the area between your ovary and your fallopian tube. It's going to swoop it up, and the rest of the cycle will continue. So in this follicular phase, estrogen is on the rise. So this is why a lot of times, day 4, 5, 6 of your period, people are commonly like, oh, I don't hate everybody. Oh, I can finally do my laundry, right? These are things where people are like, oh, I wasn't crazy. I was just about to have my period. That's why I felt that way. So you get through that follicular phase up into the ovulatory phase. Your body ovulates that egg. Now from here until you bleed again, this is the luteal phase. So a luteal phase is because that little bulb that released the egg is going to start to shrivel up, and that's called the corpus luteum. So luteal phase, that's the reason why it's called that. In the luteal phase, though, what happens is your estrogen tanks and progesterone rises. So these shifts are commonly what cause people to experience worsening mood, low motivation, low libido, right? Things are just kind of blah, everyone's pissing me off. I'm so annoyed. I can't get anything done. Fuck all of this. And then as there is usually a little bit of a blip of estrogen in the luteal phase somewhere. So there might be some days that don't fully suck. So not everybody has a full 2 weeks of a luteal phase, but for the most part, those last few days up to a week until your period starts, most people are in complete estrogen depletion. Progesterone is super high. And so people are just feeling really foggy brained and all of that. The reason being is that progesterone builds up the lining of your uterus. So it's basically waiting there saying, okay, we've prepared this cushy bed for this egg that your ovary just released to land in if it's fertilized. But once it realizes it's not fertilized and it's not landing in the cushy bed that it made, it's like, well, fuck, I made all this for you. Now I'm going to get rid of it. So it like starts to shed the lining. Progesterone tanks. That's what causes your uterus to shed the lining. And we start back at day one where that shedding of the lining becomes your period and you start to bleed again. So we're constantly going through this up and down of estrogen and then this down and up of progesterone that then tanks. So there's a wide range of fluctuation happening that fucks with most people every single month.
Yeah. And like everyone has a different cycle length, right? So there's no like point of saying like, oh, this will happen on like day 7 after you bleed or whatever. So some people can have like a 20-day cycle. Some people have like a 35-day cycle. So oftentimes like when you're educating yourself about this, some people will say like, oh, this will happen on day 14. We can't really know because every period and every cycle is so different.
Well,
But
and
the other
also, if you have things like PCOS, your cycle might be vastly different and you might go months without one. And so it's hard to tell where you're at in these things. And so it's not always a really straightforward process.
Yeah. And like the other thing when we're talking about this, you're kind of like, okay, so my hormones are moving, but what does that mean for mental health? So like these are directly correlated to your neurotransmitters. So estrogen, when you are in your like higher estrogen phases, as you said, like this is when we're feeling like ADHD better, right? We feel clear, we feel focused, we're feeling like maybe more social, like a higher libido, just like better. But when that starts to tank, we start feeling more of the depression, irritability. It's because that estrogen is like a component that is what's the word I want? It's like helping to improve the synthesis and creation of dopamine, of serotonin, of all of those things, right? Glutamate, GABA, like all of those are related into estrogen. And then progesterone has the same thing. So progesterone's more has like the biggest effect on GABA. This is like something that's calming. So for most people, progesterone can be fairly calming, but there are people who are very sensitive to this.
Well, and also with progesterone, especially, a lot of times I will warn people, especially girls, women who have ADHD or just executive dysfunction, progesterone, that inhibitory effect that GABA has can actually make your symptoms worse, right? So you might feel super dumb, super inattentive. I can't focus on anything. Every noise is pissing me off. I can't focus. That can be progesterone's effect on people who have ADHD.
So yeah, like we're thinking about people who have ADHD, right? And like we often our times are trying to increase that dopamine synthesis. Progesterone inhibits that. So if you are an ADHD person or you have a stimulant, you might notice at these points your stimulant is not as effective because progesterone is very literally going to be dulling the effect.
Well, and I always tell people too, especially with the estrogen piece, like when you think about those fluctuations I just said, right? This is why I guess we'll keep going with the ADHD example is like a stimulant is boosting dopamine and norepinephrine, right? So if your estrogen is high in that follicular phase and you're taking a stimulant, you're getting all of the dopamine and your brain is able to utilize it. It's able to synthesize it. It's able to do what it's supposed to do with that med, right? But now if we're over here in this luteal phase, I will always with my crazy dry erase board be like, your meds will work here. They don't work here, right? And this is why a lot of times you'll see people dopamine seeking in those last few days or week or however long it is for you. It will be a lot of dopamine seeking. So chocolate, risky behaviors, impulsivity, whatever it is, you can give yourself all the fucking dopamine in the world in those last few days, and it's just not going to feel as good as it does or as effective as it does in your follicular phase. And if we're going off of a normal cycle, right, we can look at it in terms of days. Like day 25 of your cycle, that same thing is not going to feel the same as it feels on day 10 of your cycle, just because of that estrogen fluctuation.
Yeah. And like the other big thing here too is that it can also exacerbate sensory issues at different points of the cycle. So if there are points where you or your teenager or whoever, your partner have like worsening sensory issues at a time of a month, and like normally I could tolerate like noise, but like holy fuck, this week I cannot. When you're at higher estrogen levels and the higher estrogen points of your cycle, you are less likely to be able to tolerate sensory stimuli. Your brain is already on overdrive. It's already got like a lot going on. It's very activated. So anything additional coming in there can be very overstimulating. So like everyone's brains are so different and there's no way to say like, oh, you will feel better during this one point. Like if you are autistic, you have ADHD, you have like PCOS, you have any of these things, mast cell dysfunction, anything, like we could be looking at kind of alterations and how that affects you.
Well, that's the most fucked up thing about this is the further I nerd out about this and the more I want to understand, the less I understand. Because from what I can tell, I mean, I even have like a kind of a, I guess this is like the dumbest running joke with myself about like every single fucking research article about this. It'll say stuff like I'm gonna find the quotes because I have like a list of the literature in humans is inconsistent, perhaps due to differential hormone sensitivity. Like no longitudinal studies exist that chart the relationship between hormonal fluctuation and ADHD symptom characteristics and severity across the lifespan. No definitive research exists on how hormones affect ADHD in women. So nothing is definitive, but the reason for this is because of those variables. There are far too many fucking variables, and every time somebody gets too far down the research rabbit hole, they go, oh shit, this is going to be really hard to have a control. Like, how are we supposed to design a study, right? And so this, I think, contributes to the lack of research that's done on non-cishet dude bodies, right? Like, when there is so much variation between any two humans, it's hard to say this is exactly what happens and this is the exact solution to that, which is why my message to everybody is always understand your own body because no one else is gonna.
Yeah, dude. And like also just on the research front, half the population. Let's just not do research on the fact that half of the population like needing these medications and having mood fluctuations. Like let's just not look at that at all. Like puberty, how it affects ADHD in girls. Let's just not do studies on it because like they're just not fucking there. Like it's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so many things just in the context of that sentence that you just said that I'm like, there's so much to say because it also, this isn't, like I said, this isn't just people who bleed. These are prepubescent, preteens, adolescents. These are women postmenopausal. These are humans who have had hysterectomies. Even if you don't have a uterus and you don't bleed, your ovaries are still going through follicular development, an ovulatory phase, and then a luteal phase. And so you're still having these changes. And so if you're not on any type of like hormone replacement therapy, or even if you are and it's at the wrong levels, or you don't have a provider that's knowledgeable about how to incorporate this into your care as it relates to your mental health, all bets are off. Like we're just going to fuck around and find out with hormone labs. Yep. Hormone labs, it really matters when you get them drawn in your cycle. And if you aren't timing them correctly, it's just a snapshot of information that means nothing.
Dude, so many naturopaths have like given my patients like progesterone, estrogen. I'm like, did they ask you where you were in your cycle when they took this? No. Did they ever ask you anything about it? No, they just said it was really high. And I was like, what? And then they end up on these hormones and I'm like, but you don't, what? Like, this is not benefiting you. You're worse.
You'll get a lot of providers who will specifically tell people like, these will not impact your mental health. And as mental health providers, we're told, oh, hormones are out of our realm because it's not psych, right? But hormones are mental health. If it's a differential, like, hey, sure, there's some like symptoms that meet criteria for like a hypomanic episode, but it's cyclical with their fucking cycle. That's not hypomania. I need to investigate further. Why is this happening for this person? And what is their actual diagnosis?
So recommendations for folks is like really like know your cycle, and the best way to do that is to track it. What's your recommendation usually for people for tracking? I have feelings about tracking, but go ahead.
Yeah. I have lots of feelings about tracking, especially, again, if we're still in the context of ADHD, doing anything on a routine is going to be super fucking hard. So a lot of times there's a few different ways I'll have people do this, right? Obviously, if you have a period, you track based on that. If you don't have a period, you track based on your symptoms and you look at it and say, oh shit, this is when I'm always feeling this way. And it looks like it goes on a pattern that's about this many weeks or this many days. You can get as specific or non-specific as you want. Obviously, being careful to not track with any type of app or device that you don't feel comfortable with sharing your reproductive data with. And that's, always in flux as to what is and is not safe. The one thing that I do tell people a lot that is helpful is, I guess there's one caveat to this, but if you're having days where you're like, man, I just feel like shit the last few days, I'm like pissed at everybody, whatever, screenshot the home screen of your phone, and this will create a log of the date and time. And you can go back into your screenshots and say, okay, these are the days that I did that screenshot. And then you can look at a calendar and kind of line those up on a day that maybe you're like super hyper focused. Maybe it's, maybe you're in your follicular phase and your dopamine is working and your estrogen is high and you're like, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to sit down and figure this out. That way you can look through your screenshots and be like, oh shit, you know what, this is on a cycle. So yeah, there's lots of nuance to how to track, and what's actually going to be effective for any individual is going to be entirely based on like, how good are you at routines? Are you somebody that's actually going to do this? How much does it matter to you to know this about yourself? Because that buy-in matters as well.
Yeah. And then just to throw out there too, like if you decide to use an app, please be aware that even the apps who say they do not sell your data can absolutely be sharing your data to third parties, including the government. Your like period information you're tracking can be subpoenaed in criminal cases. Like there are concerns that if abortion is ever outlawed, they might be tracking to make sure that like you are not pregnant. And if they see, they might be able to use that against you at some point, miscarriages, anything like that. So be conscious. A lot of even these like things when deleted, they will store that data still and it can be tracked back to you. So highly recommend using like an old school calendar and a notepad. If you're one of the ADHD folks who has your notepad app up with 6,000 things on it. I like that one. I have a Notion personally, and I set up my own like little like data set on there, and it tracks it and graphs it for me. I like that too because it can't be found, really identified. But yeah, that's the biggest thing is like tracking. How many months do you usually recommend tracking before you can get like a true pattern?
I mean, it really depends on what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Like in a clinical setting, if we're like, hey, we're going to wait to make med changes until this happens, it really, I think, depends on the severity of the symptoms. Like if someone's actively suicidal, obviously I'm not going to be like, come back to me in 3 cycles. But if they're like, man, I really don't know if my meds are working, or I don't know if this is connected to my cycle, but I'd like to find out more and I don't think I want to make changes yet, I'd rather understand that first. I kind of go based on a case by case basis. One thing that I really think is important to mention as well when it comes to tracking that is a big thing that I see, because I see a lot of adolescents who are just barely starting their periods, or there's lots of like behavioral stuff coming up at home, or parents are really upset. Like, I don't know why there's so many negative things happening. Their mood is bad. They're super anxious, whatever, is also involving the parent in that, but having that conversation with both of them together so that it's not like the parents coming to them like, well, are you on your period? It's more like making sure the parent is in on this education, because it's very likely, even if the parent does have a cycle, it's not necessarily true that they understand any of this about themselves. And so for them to fully understand and help their adolescent track, they're going to need to have this education too. So I typically will have them on board. And I even sit down in appointments and I say, okay, have you been tracking? If they say no, I'll say, okay, give me a ballpark time that this symptom was happening, and we'll sit down and we'll go through a calendar and we'll say, okay, and then when did your period start? All that stuff, and kind of sit down with them and help them understand why this is important. Because once you see that correlation, it can give people so much insight. And I think doing this for our teen and adolescent patients early on is really important, so they have the language they need to report their symptoms correctly to any future providers,
Absolutely. And also bearing in mind that like many times parents and kids have cycles that are in sync. So like if your teenager's feeling a little cranky and you're noticing, very likely that you are also cranky and that you are also like heightened sensitivity to their their moods because you are also having a bad mood.
Even if they don't have their period yet, like they will start to cycle and release some of these hormones before we ever even have a period. And so this is something where you might notice it in your pre-menstrual, don't have a period yet child, and wonder like, oh my gosh, are they behaviorally something's off? Is there something terrible happening? Do I need to figure out how to fix it? They could just be their body is starting to cycle with your body and shit's about to get crazy.
Yeah, dude. All right. So we have several other episodes coming up on hormones, including kind of looking at like the perinatal, postpartum shifts that happen and how that can impact mental health, looking at ADHD, autism, looking at perimenopause, looking at menopause, looking at all of the things like hysterectomies, birth control, and how those things affect mood and medications. So we hope that you'll tune in over the next couple weeks to learn more. And thank you for tuning in today, y'all.